Dr. Doug Cardell. Welcome to the show, Unity and Identity.
Happy to be here.
How would you define a healthy society?
The first and most important thing is how we create value. My longtime perception and advocacy, and a lot of what the book is really based on, is the idea that we shouldn't be working for a living. We should be focused on creating value for each other. If I could change the world in any way, that's the way I would change it. Too often, we don't think about how it affects the end consumer. So, as an example, right now, I know for me, when I got up this morning, I didn't go, oh, darn, I've got to do a podcast. I've got to go to work again, blah, blah, blah. Uh, I was excited to come here. And a lot of the reason I was is because, and am, is because I want to create value for your listeners.
Hmm.
I'm guessing that you feel the same way, that you didn't get up this
Yes.
morning going, oh, I've got to go interview this silly economist and no, I think you got up this morning going, I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. But
Hmm.
more important, you want to create value for the people we're talking to. In my vision of the ideal world, everybody would be doing whatever their job is. They don't think of it as work, they think of it as I'm creating value for other people. In that world, everybody becomes an entrepreneur. Everybody, in a sense, becomes a capitalist because only by being an entrepreneur or a capitalist can we put the value we're creating for others out there. I think that's the way almost everybody I've ever talked to, once they hear the idea, they go, yeah, that's right. They see that creating value for others is the most valuable thing we can be doing with our lives. We'll get paid for it. You're going to make some money off the podcast. I may sell a few more books, but that's not why I'm in this. And I don't think it's why you're in it. I think it's about creating value for other people.
When you say value, are you always talking about monetarily, like in a capitalist society, like we're creating wealth so that it
Oh,
could be distributed or capital?
no,
Or
no,
what do you
no.
mean by value precisely?
Thing, whatever that in our case right now, I'm assuming that the value we're trying to create is knowledge, wisdom, perspective, things we can't put a monetary value on. No, so no, I'm when I say creating value, value is always in the mind of the consumer. The people watching us today came here thinking they would get value, and certainly not monetary value because we're not paying people to listen to us. So they're not going to get money out of this. What
Hmm.
they're going to get, I think, is some sort of knowledge, perspective, wisdom. It's hard to say because they're the consumers. It's hard to say exactly what it is that they came here for. They just might like the look of our faces. But so, yeah, I can't say, but they're here because they perceived they would get value. And hopefully we'll deliver that. I'm assuming it's likely wisdom, knowledge, perspective, and hopefully we'll deliver that today.
What is the source of the value of all things?
Value lies in the minds of the consumer. More accurately, probably the collection of all possible consumers. So, a lot of the problems we have in society are because we get that all mixed up. People think, for example, that gold has value. Gold has intrinsic value. Gold only has the value we give it. Part of that is because gold has properties that we like. It's shiny, it's pretty, and it's good for electronic circuits. But part of it is because of its scarcity. I saw a headline not too long ago that said that the asteroid Psyche, I think was the name of it, had enough gold on it to make everybody in the world a billionaire. And that's just silly. Let's imagine what would happen. So Psyche comes somewhere near us and explodes in the atmosphere and drops billions of dollars of gold everywhere. So now we've got a 3-inch layer of gold in our backyards. Now, what's going to happen supply and demand wise? Well, now gold is going to become basically valueless. There's tons of it. It's free. You just go out in your backyard and scoop it
Mhm.
up. In fact, I suspect it would end up having negative value. How is that possible? Well, I would probably pay people to get it out of my backyard because I don't want a 3 inch layer of gold in my backyard. I want grass. So I would pay people to cart it away. That's what we mean by negative value. The gold itself isn't isn't what's valuable. It's partly supply and demand, partly its properties, but none of it is built into the gold. It's the value we give it. And that's true of everything. It's true of work, labor, things, products. And so if we start seeing that that's the way things are, we start to understand the world a whole lot better. Too many people think that things themselves, or things like labor, anything, has some specific value that can be attributed to it on its own, rather than in the minds of the consumers.
Humor gives things value, loss mindset, and scarcity. Gold works differently than fiat currency. We can continuously print money and basically cause inflation, and then we're devaluing the currency because now there's so much oversupply.
Right. That is analogous to what we just said. If there were that much gold in our backyards, it would lose value. That's what happens when governments use fiat currency to create extra money. We get inflation, which is really just a hidden tax that benefits governments. It also tends to benefit the rich more than the poor because people that have assets, like, for example, look what's happened to gold in the last
Mhm.
couple. If you held gold, you could have bought it 3 or 4 years ago for $1,500 an ounce. Now it's at $4,500 an ounce because of inflation. So who got rich out of the deal? People that held assets like gold. Who got poor? People that had to buy groceries, pay for housing, buy gasoline. So inflation helps government, helps the rich, and harms the poor. And government does it because it gives them power. You can't argue with the idea money is power.
Mhm.
And when government prints more money, they get more power. That's a lot of why governments do it. They borrow money to, or print it to create programs that give them the power to influence voters to vote for them.
I feel like we're going to get more into specifics as we move on. But for everyone listening that maybe doesn't have much background in economics and finance, what are the basic things of economics, the ABCs that people should know and why they should care?
The basics of economics are built on what we've just talked about, some of the ideas of
Hmm.
value and supply and demand. But ultimately, it's actions that produce behaviors that are derived from choices, ABC. And every decision, any organism, not even just a human, every organism makes decisions. Now, they may not be conscious. I don't know how plants think. But I do know this: if I put a plant in a room, it's going to grow to the light. It's at some level made a choice. That choice led to an action. It grew toward the light. Over time, actions become behaviors. If I toss a ball toward you, you're not going to think and make a choice, should I catch that ball? It's going to be a behavior. You're going to do it automatically because that's how you've learned. At some
Hmm.
point, you did make a choice, probably a year and a half old. You found out when people threw balls, it was good to catch them. But over time, that's just become a behavior that you would never think about. And so everything that happens in economics starts with choices. Every decision is an economic choice. People don't understand that well, but economics is about efficiency. It's about how do I make the best use of resources for myself. Now, what does that involve? Does it involve money? It could. But right now, both you and I are giving up a resource, our time. The people
Hmm.
that are listening to us are giving up a resource, their time. They're doing it in hopes of gaining something of value. That value may not be monetary. Education, for example, if you choose to go to college, you're investing resources in hopes of getting something out of it later on. It might be knowledge, it might not be money, but it might be money. When I get done with this podcast, I'm probably going to go for a run. Why would I do that? Well, I'm making a choice with my time. I could take a nap instead. That's what a lot of people might do. But I'm going to go for a run. And it's partly because I'm a capitalist. And this is another thing people don't understand. Capitalism is investing for the future. When I go for a run, what I'm saying is if I do this today, I will profit tomorrow. I might live 2 years longer or feel better for the next 3 or 4 years because I'm healthier. I might be able to perform better. And as you can probably tell just by talking to me, I'm pretty energetic for a 77-year-old. That's where that energy comes from. I do things to make myself profit with more energy. Anytime you invest for the future, you're a capitalist. It doesn't have to be money. Capitalism is the economy of hope. It's saying things can be better, and if I invest today, I can make them better. Now, of course, that's true of money too. I invest in the stock market, the bond market. I want profit in the future. But it isn't just about money. Every decision is ultimately an economic decision. It's deciding how to use any resource, time, money, physicality, energy, anything you expend, you're expending to make a profit. That's
It sounds to me that capitalism is innately human, or
yes,
humans are innately capitalist.
that's exactly right. A lot of people don't understand. They have this silly picture of capitalists being evil.
Hmm.
Now, are there capitalists that have done bad things? Well, of course. Are there doctors, lawyers, teachers, and electricians that have done bad things? Of course.
Hmm.
The things many people perceive as the evils of capitalism, unquote, are evils of government. If people are doing bad things, it's the job of government to stop them. And so, will people try and do bad things? Of course, that's part of humanity. People aren't perfect. People have some tendency, not always as an equal tendency, but some people have a tendency toward greed. In almost every religion, greed is considered a sin because it leads to lots of other sins. And so, like, why does somebody kill somebody? Well, many times it's for some kind of greed. It could be money, it could be fighting over a spouse and greed for attention. It could be a lot of different things. So, people have some tendency to do that. Are capitalists an exception? No, they're not. There's greedy capitalists for sure. But it's the government's job to stop them. Too often, what happens is like this: if you're getting burglarized, you call the police, and the police show up, and then they help the burglar load your stuff. That's a big problem. But too often, that's what happens. The government is helping the bad guys instead of the good guys. I live in Arizona, and here we have open range laws. What that means is if cows come onto my property, break through my sliding glass door, and eat my furniture, I'm out of luck. I can't sue the cattle owner. The only way I can keep myself from having problems with cattle is if I fence them out. I have to build the fences. And believe me, I spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours fencing cattle out. That's an example of government corrupted by capitalists, not the same as capitalists being evil. They're pursuing their interest, like the burglar and the police. Would I be upset with the burglar? Sure. But I'm more upset with the police because the
Hmm.
burglar's job wasn't to protect me. The burglars is pursuing a greedy self-interest. I understand that. I don't approve of it, but I understand it. The cop's job was to help me. The same thing is true here in Arizona. The cattlemen, of course, they save money. They don't want to build fences, but it was the government's job to prevent that. They're the ones to blame, not the capitalists. It's important for people to see that because too often they blame the capitalists for failures of government. They talk about the capitalists keeping people down or whatever. Capitalism is an economic system. It has no power. Capitalism can't make you do anything. No capitalist can make you do anything. It just can't be done. Now, it's possible that a capitalist employer can put conditions on employment, but those are things that are negotiated. In other words, if your employer asks you to do something you don't want to do, you're free to go somewhere else or negotiate and say, you know what, if you're going to do that, I'm going to have to leave because we too many people, because of the lack of creating value, feel imprisoned in their jobs. They're trapped into working for a living. But you're not imprisoned by your job. Find a better way to create value. And that should always be in the back of our minds is how can I better create value for the world? How can I help the world by my contribution? To think about, huh?
Especially that last part where you're saying we ought to create positive value for the world. I'm thinking specifically for the United States, where we have a culture that allows for Silicon Valley. We can raise the most venture capital in the world. We have a very entrepreneurial spirit where you're writing a book or you've written a book, most likely going to write another one. I'm creating a podcast. We have that entrepreneurial spirit. But when I look around, at least when I talk to some of my friends or thinking back, people like who were in school, everything was focused on I need this specific job, I need this specific career. It was rare for me to figure out. I never thought I was going to create something. I always thought I was going to go to college, I was going to get a job, and this was going to be it. Because that's all I've been told. This came out because of a lot of conversations I had with people, and I saw the struggle. But I don't see many people having that passion to create value. It's always maybe indirectly, I want to be dependent on my career.
Yeah, I understand completely. People can create value in their job. They don't
Hmm.
have to be an entrepreneur and go out on their own. So, for
Okay.
example, somebody working in a fast food joint, he's sitting there flipping burgers. I suspect most of the people that are doing that don't like their jobs. They're doing it because they have to do something to make a living. Let's imagine that person just changing their mindset a little bit and now start thinking about that end consumer and start going, now that guy just pulled up at the drive through because he's hungry, he doesn't have time to cook, and he's paying me to do it for him. The burger joint is just a middleman. The consumer is paying the guy making that burger to make it. If he starts thinking about that, he's going to start going, well, I'm going to make this guy the best burger I can make. And I'm going to put it together really nice. And I'm going to serve it to that person in the most happy, cheerful way I can. I'm going to try and make his day. Several things are going to happen if that's the way this guy starts approaching his job. First of all, he's going to be a whole lot happier
Hmm.
because when he does that with the consumer, he's going to see the consumer's reaction. And I guarantee that reaction will be different than it was the day before when he wasn't thinking that way. The consumer is going to see the love, if you want to call it that. The consumer is going to go, wow, this guy cares about what he's doing. And it's going to make the
Hmm.
consumer feel good. After a while, the boss is going to see that. And he's likely to rise through the ranks. Now, it's possible he's got a boss that's going to be threatened by that. And so the boss may fire him. But with that attitude, he's going to get hired again somewhere else quickly.
Hmm.
The other thing that's likely to happen is if the boss does appreciate him, as most bosses would, it's not going to be long before he's moving up the ranks. and he may end up owning the company. The current chairman of Costco started at Costco as a forklift operator, and now he's the chairman of the
Yeah.
board. I guess he's president, not chairman. That's what happens when your focus is creating value, not just doing your job. And so everybody can do this, but you are completely right. It's really sad, very sad, that that's not how we're taught in school. Sad that people aren't encouraged to do what they can do. And a lot of the things we do actually undermine that. For example, giving people unearned grades. It's creating a culture where we don't fail anybody.
Hmm.
Failure failure is one of the best things because the kid in school needs to learn where his talents lie. You can't learn that if you succeed at everything. You haven't learned any lessons at all. It helps a lot to understand that you got A's in math and D's or F's in art. That's telling you might not want to pursue a career in art. You might want to go for math instead.
Hmm.
We help people by allowing them to fail at things they're not particularly good at. And I know people. I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to identify anybody, but I I know a few artists, and I know one particularly that complains a lot because he can't make enough money at art. And the reality is he's not very good at it. He didn't learn in school that he's not much of an artist. And so as a result, yeah, he's not going to make money because he's not creating value for others. He's creating value for himself. In fact, many artists, in fact, I've heard him say it, it's art for art's sake. Now, I'm not against people doing art for art's sake, but they have to understand if you're doing it for art's sake, you're not doing it for the sake of money. And so you're not going to make money doing it. I'm also a musician. I played in bands of one kind or another since I was, what, 12? And I have a lot of friends that are musicians. And some of them are musicians for music's sake. They don't have a day job and they don't do very well financially. However, most don't blame the system for that. They understand what they're doing. They say, I want to make music. This is my way of creating value. A lot of people do like it. Doesn't pay great, but people like it. I'm making them happy. What's that line from American Pie? If I had the chance, I could make people dance and they'd be happy for a while. I have friends that are musicians that look at it that way. And they're willing to not make a lot of money to express value their way. And that's another key part that people don't get about economics. We would never want a world in which everybody made the same amount of money. Different things have different values. And so, who am I to say that that musician shouldn't be allowed to be a musician because he's not making enough money? That's not my call. That's his call. Other people are going to make more money doing other things. That's their call. And so people are not equal. They don't have equal talents. They don't have equal anything. One of the things I did in the book was create a little scenario where I took, I think it was a dozen or so famous people and swapped their roles. So, would you want to buy a record sung by Pablo Picasso? Do you think that Julia Roberts should have run D-Day? Do you think should be have paintings in the Louvre? And I'm guessing the answer to none of those is that people have different talents. And capitalism says, find what you love, find your bliss, and use it to create value for other people. How could that possibly be a bad world? Even if people aren't making the same amount of money, even if some people are struggling a little bit because that's what they want, and other people are getting rich because they're doing things that create tremendous amounts of value. And that really is what happens. I mean, look at what we're doing now. You and I'm on a PC. I'm not sure what you're using, but and we're talking on the internet. 50 years ago, this was unthinkable.
Hmm.
It was absolute. The closest thing was Dixie's TV watch or whatever it was in the cartoons. People couldn't even imagine this. Now, how did this happen? Well, part of it was Bill Gates. I'm on a PC. I couldn't be on a PC without Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates got rich. Cool. He made my life better. So I'm going to complain because he got money by making my life better? How does that work? That's backwards logic. He helped me, and by leaps and bounds. I'm talking to you right now because I'm on Starlink. Elon Musk created Starlink. He got rich. But we couldn't be having this conversation because I live out in the middle of nowhere. And we couldn't be having this conversation if it weren't
Mhm.
for Starlink. So again, Elon Musk improved my life. He made my life better. Why do I care if he got rich? I got richer. You got richer. We're allowed to do this because of Gates and Musk. I ran the numbers on Jeff Bezos. Amazon, Amazon.com has made every person in the United States $2,000 to $3,000 a year richer.
Hmm.
Amazon saves us, in my case, a lot of time because I'm an hour and a half from shopping. So if I want to go shopping, I've got to drive a ways. And so, but now I get the stuff delivered to my door every day. That saves me a ton. And it saves most people a whole lot of money because they have to do a lot less shopping by going into stores, blah, blah, blah. But more than that, Amazon's buying power brings prices down. Prices at various places, you'll often find that on Amazon, they're the cheapest. That's because Amazon's got gigantic buying power. And so they can get things a lot cheaper and then sell them a lot cheaper than other people can. So everyone is richer because Jeff Bezos created Amazon. Now, again, he got rich. Well, so what? In in economics, we call this growing the pie. And this part, I think most of your listeners are going to find a little bit shocking. One of the best measures of well being is per capita GDP. That is, how much each of us produce and gets put into the common pot, as it were.
Mhm.
From the year zero to the year 1500, there was no increase in per capita GDP. For 1500 years, a millennia and a half, there was no human progress. None. No one was better off in the year 1500. The average person was not better off than they were in the year zero. Now, in 1500, what happened? Capitalism started. It started out, it's kind of like the birth of rock and roll. There's a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say one of the key elements was Watt and the steam engine. He had this idea for a steam engine, competing with somebody else for patent rights, and got venture capitalists to invest in his idea of the steam engine and pulled it off. Now, the idea didn't really catch on much. Between 1500 and 1700, per capita GDP increased 40%. That meant everybody in the world was now 40% better off than they were for the first 1500 years of keeping track. That's huge. I mean, that's huge. But in 1700, things got really crazy. That was when the United States was being born. The first country in the world actually dedicated to capitalism. It's the first country in the world to have patents enshrined in its constitution.
Hmm.
Without patents, you can't have entrepreneurs because who's going to create it if somebody else can take it? They
True.
have patent and copyright and trademark protections. That was a big first for the US. But then as things started taking off in the US, per capita GDP here started growing dramatically. And we dragged the whole rest of the world along with us. Between 1820 and now, per capita GDP in the world has grown 18 times, not 18%. It's 18 times more than it was in 1500. So that means every person in the world is 18 times better off because of capitalism. And here in the US and some of the other developed economies, that's closer to 40 times. We are 40 times better off than we were in 1500 because of capitalism. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens because of what we call growing the pie. From the year zero to the year 1500, the size of the pie stayed the same. There was the same amount of stuff in the world you had to share. Now, what did that mean? Then it meant that the rich were really bad people. Huh? Because the only way to get more if there's a fixed amount of stuff is to take it from somebody else.
Hmm.
That's why the legend of Robin Hood. Because back then, taking from the rich to give to the poor made sense because you were fighting a battle over a fixed amount of stuff. But now there's 40 times more stuff. So what's happened is entrepreneurial capitalists have grown the amount of stuff. So there's a whole lot more for all of us to share. And so Bill Gates, Musk, Bezos made the pie a whole lot bigger. They increased the amount of stuff we have to share. And so by doing that, they made all of us richer. And they didn't hurt us one drop. They didn't get rich by taking our money. They got rich by creating more wealth for all of us. Now, how can that possibly be construed as a bad thing? Now it's Robin Hood in reverse. The rich get rich by making all the rest of us rich. They aren't getting rich by taking from us, they're getting rich by giving to us. And that's what that creating value thing gets to be about. The people that are richest right now, look at any of the 10 richest people in the world, every single one of them got rich by making the world better, by creating gigantic amounts of value for the world. I mean, look at, Musk, Starlink, he's putting up his own satellites. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember watching the launch of the first satellite, and it was a huge government effort. Now we've got entrepreneurial capitalists shooting satellites up on a weekly basis. This is amazing stuff. And it happens because of entrepreneurial capitalism.
Do you think there is like the idea or the concern of somebody having too much money? And I bring that up because I agree with you with historically that capitalism has grown the pie. And some of the numbers that you mentioned, like 1500, 1700, there was a 40% growth in GDP. So it is evident that capitalism has grown the pie and on average has made everybody more prosperous. But the sentiment that I get, I guess, is more so you'll see in like the younger generation, or at least those, I guess, around my age who are trying to enter the job market. It's harder in the job market nowadays. And a lot of people have frustrations where they see Elon Musk potentially becoming in the next decade the first trillionaire. Yet there are people who are struggling to get a job that's maybe 50K. Do you think there is at some point too much for a certain amount of people?
Well, first of all, I would have to wonder what that means. In other words, what's the idea of too much?
Hmm.
I would suggest that I'm going to paraphrase the Beatles here. And in the end, the value you create is equal to the value you make. People should be rewarded in compensation for their contributions. Someone who creates a ton of value should get a ton of money. And I don't see anything at all wrong with that. It's it's financial karma. And I would
Hmm.
suggest that that's a good thing. Gates has more money than I do. I'm not at all jealous or bothered. He's created more value than I have. He's done more for the world than I have. I can't argue with that. I hope that maybe someday I could create the kind of value he's created, not because I want the money, but because I want to create that much value. And most of the people that we're talking about didn't get their start by just going after the money.
Mhm.
They got their start by trying to make the world better. I mean, Elon Musk is spending his own money not just to put regular his own satellites into space, but he's also running his own space program. That's got to be he's taking a big financial hit
Mhm.
by doing it. He's paying to put astronauts up there because he thinks it's a good thing for the world. And the other thing is that without those possibilities of rewards, people tend not to do stuff. That's the whole reason socialism, or one of the reasons that socialism always collapses, is even pre-socialism, the early collectivist societies all collapsed. People may not know this, but the United States started out, some of it started out as socialism. Jamestown,
Mhm.
Mayflower Colony were collectivist, and they both ended up on the verge of starvation because people saw that people who weren't working could do as well as they could do. They stopped working too. And so, at a time in history when it would have taken everybody's utmost effort to make this endeavor succeed, people were slacking off, and they literally ended up digging up corpses to get food. We're not talking about a little bit of suffering here. We're talking about huge amounts. And and that's always the case in socialism. It's the antithesis of communism or sort of capitalism, and it doesn't work. It can't work. I mean, and I don't think most of the people that think it's a good thing because they're really thinking about it. Is anybody in the US really advocating that we want a country more like North Korea? Again, no.
No.
North Korea is the purest example of socialism that exists today. There are some others that are close, but North Korea is the prima donna. It's the socialist country. And look at where they're at. People talk about things like income inequality. Income inequality is far greater in North Korea than it is in the US. You look at a typical person in North Korea and compare them with the government elite, the people that have the money in North
Mhm.
Korea. And that's a whole different thing than comparing a worker in the US with Bill Gates. That government leader in North Korea hasn't done anything for the worker. They're taking the money for themselves. They are truly exploitive. They're the ones that are making the workers work for them. And again, not unlike the collectivist economies early on in the US, it's in North Korea, it's still happening today that people are selling their children to other people so that the other people can use their children as food.
Mhm.
And pets is pretty common. How can we imagine a life worse than that? I mean, it makes you want to cry. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so, is there such a thing as too rich? I would suggest that it's too rich if you're getting rich by not creating value. Now, is there some
Mhm.
guy out there manipulating a hedge fund to make millions of dollars that is not helping the US economy a bit? Yes, there are. And the government should put a stop to that. That's not good. And so, if that's the guy you're talking about having too much money, I would say absolutely. But the guy that has a lot of money because he created a lot of value, I think he's getting what he deserves. And isn't that what we all want? Now, the guy trying to get a job making 50, I don't mean it in any way coldly. In fact, I mean it in the warmest possible way that that guy needs to go find a way to create value by exploiting his bliss. He's got to go out there and find out what he loves to do, develop the talent to do it really, really well, and then go make some money doing it by creating value for other people. And like we said in the very first few sentences of our talk today, we weren't taught that in school. So that guy that's trying to get a job making 50K is a victim of the education system. He wasn't taught what he's good at. He was told, well, you can be good at everything. We're going to pass you along no matter what. Same in sports, we give everybody a participation trophy. I'm not against participation trophies. Showing up is important.
Mhm.
You can't do anything if you don't show up. But so is most valuable player an important trophy to get. It's okay to give both, not just give people participation trophies. And if you look at things like sports, look at the US Olympic team. What you'll see is in places where merit matters, in meritocracy, you'll see the ultimate diversity. You look at the US Olympic team and you don't see a bunch of old white guys. Why not? Because there's meritocracy. Government doesn't get a role in it. Nobody gets chosen based on anything other than how good can they do flip flops or whatever their sport is.
Mhm.
And so the ultimate cure for a whole lot of the stuff that we blame capitalism for is capitalism. Capitalism solves the problems the government creates. I think back to compact fluorescent light bulbs.
Mhm.
Remember, they tried to force us all to buy those. And I understood their idea. They wanted to make energy use produce less bad things for the environment. That's a good idea. But the government getting involved actually made the problem worse. Well, a lot of people did go out and buy those fluorescent bulbs. And right now, since bulbs last longer than incandescent bulbs, a lot of those people are still using those fluorescent bulbs, in spite of the fact that now we have LED bulbs that use far less energy than those CFLs did, because capitalists figured out a still better way. And
Mhm.
so government did was prolong the use of excessive energy by forcing us to get something that isn't as efficient as the new alternative. People are still going to use those bulbs till they burn out. Then they'll get LEDs. But during that time, they're using a substantial amount more electricity than they could have used. Crazy stuff, huh?
Yeah. And it reminds me of that last part, government getting involved in companies, because the US had very much a laissez-faire kind of mindset when it comes to capitalism, comes to the markets, and that there's no state-run enterprises. Although we saw last summer, if I remember correctly, the Trump administration bought a 10% stake in one or two companies early on.
Was first.
Do you think that's going to follow that pattern that you spoke of before, that government getting involved in an enterprise is going to slow down innovation, the capitalism spur, and all that?
I think it's a really bad idea. People describe my views as excessively conservative or whatever, but um, you hardly get more conservative than the Trump administration. And there's a lot I disagree with the Trump administration. And that's certainly one of them, is that the government should not be putting a stake in companies. That's the definition of socialism, is when the government owns means of production. Even a partial ownership, my first concern is it's a slippery slope. This
Hmm.
president can buy a 10% stake. What the next president can use that as a precedent to buy a 25% stake. And the next one a 50%. Pretty soon we have socialism. To me, it's very scary. I think it's a really bad idea. Yes, I think it's also going to have a negative impact on creating value. The market does this stuff way better than the government. Imagine a battleship that weighs tons, tons, and tons, as opposed to an equal weight of speedboats. That's the difference between the government and a free market economy. Imagine how long it's going to take to turn that battleship, to speed that battleship up, to slow it down, to do anything to maneuver it. On the other hand, an equal weight of speedboats can turn on a dime. They can
Mhm.
start. That's the way capitalism works in free markets. We have all these companies out there trying to do stuff, and some of them are going to fail. A third of new start businesses fail. Two-thirds fail in 10 years. The problem is when government does it, they're failing with our money.
Mhm.
But government is going to make mistakes. When the Obama administration invested in solar power companies that went broke, the government is not the place to be making those choices, not because they're always wrong, but two-thirds of new enterprises fail.
Mhm.
And so what you want is to spread that out across the widest possible number of actors so that when one fails, it doesn't hurt the rest of us. And so if Intel is in danger of failing, if there aren't enough capitalists that go, I think they can succeed, and so we're going to invest in it to help them succeed, then they should fail. And somebody else will come along to replace them. And so the government's interfering is only going to make things worse. It can't make it better unless they get incredibly lucky. Is it possible the government could back a wild success? Yeah, it could happen. But I'm certainly not going to bet on that because right now the Department of Energy, for example, has 15,000 employees approximately. Now, how many people out there in the world are doing stuff trying to do better energy stuff? Millions.
Mhm.
Who's more likely to come up with a great idea? Well, those millions, of course. Those 15,000 government employees aren't going to do it. And so, what we want is lots and lots of people out there trying to create value by exploring new and better ways to do stuff. And it's happening all around us, but too many times government gets in the way, or they try and regulate it, in ways that make no sense at all. Not long ago, we bought a new microwave. I ended up actually giving it to a friend. It made me crazy. Where I live, we have a lot of power failures. And every time the power went off, that microwave would reset itself so that it had a child-proof lock on the door. And I had to
Mhm.
punch a whole bunch of buttons to reset it so I could open the door of my microwave after I cook something. Well, I researched it, and it turns out that 50 kids a year get burned taking something hot out of the microwave. Now, that has fixing that problem. We're fixing a problem that 50 children a year have. And by the way, the biggest source of burns in children is adults dropping hot liquids on them by way more. 3,000 children a year get burned because adults drop hot liquids on them. And then there's other causes too. But 50 a year get burned by, and none of them fatally. We're talking about just minor burns. Most of them didn't even require hospitalization. What did that cost? Well, engineers at every microwave company had to now design a way to make the microwave door not open for a child. So they have to design it so that you have to punch a bunch of keystrokes in order to be able to open the door and hope that the kid can't figure out how to do that. Which, by
Mhm.
my experience with kids, is they'll figure that out in a heartbeat. You got to pay engineers to redesign it, redo your assembly line to put all these things into it. You got to hire software designers to figure out the software to make this all happen. Then you've got to reprint all of your manuals. Okay. So we're talking an increase in microwave oven costs. How much is it? I don't know. 10, 15, 20% more, maybe. But that's a price that every consumer that buys a microwave has to pay to keep 50 kids a year from being burned. That's just silly. It's regulation that helps almost no one and harms almost everyone. And
Mhm.
it's something the government shouldn't be doing. If If there's a problem, the companies will figure that out. People are going to start protesting and saying, and by the way, I know I didn't see. Did anybody see any big protests by people complaining about children being burned by microwaves? No. If there were, you can bet companies would turn on a dime and fix it because they want to please the consumer. It's the consumers. That's what they're there for. They're trying to create value for the consumer. And they're not going to let that happen if they know it's going to cost them business.
Sounds like government tries to solve every little problem. And by solving every little problem, restarting the process of engineering, manufacturing, distributing, and then having the consumer to adapt to the product once again. Because if it's just these, if we're going by the same example, today it could be the 50 kids, tomorrow something else, next week a third thing. Whereas companies can probably figure out, are these really the issues that the consumer wants to be fixed?
That's right.
So when we're trying to figure out the avenue American society wants to go with capitalism, or even if it's trying to flirt a little bit with socialism, why are there so many different perspectives, or why do economists disagree on a direction in what is best for the American society to flourish or to improve it with economics?
There's a couple reasons. Too many economists are, first of all, ideologues. That is, they start with a perception of what's best and then try and use economic principles to justify it. It reminds me of an exaggerated form of it. And I'm a big Beatle fan. John Lennon's great. But John Lennon was not an economist. And so he writes this song, Imagine.
Mhm.
Imagine no religion. Imagine no countries. Imagine no possessions. How does that work? I mean, just out of curiosity, you and I have to share a toothbrush. What does it mean to have no possessions? He titled the song correctly. He's imagining a world that doesn't exist and can never exist because the ideas are silly. Imagining no possessions. How do you have a life with no possessions? I mean, you got to have some stuff. To say we all have to share that stuff is not a great idea. But there are economists that don't go that far, but basically start with the same idea. They start with the world would be better if, and then use economics to justify their conclusion. I practice evidentiary economics, which means I go where the evidence leads. The
Mhm.
evidence led me to socialism, I would be a socialist. I'm not here on an ideological basis. I'm here to argue on the basis of what works. What does the most good stuff for people? And free market entrepreneurial capitalism is clearly that answer, assuming that it's regulated by government in appropriate ways. I mean, I'm also not an anarchist. I'm not saying government shouldn't get involved. I'm saying government should get involved. There's things government needs to do. It has to protect us from bad actors because capitalists, like anybody else, can be bad actors.
Mhm.
And when they are, the government has to stop them. The other reason economists get it wrong is it's impossible. That's another thing people don't understand. One of my major research projects was a 30-year study of real personal consumption, which is probably the best measure of what's going to happen next in the economy. It's looking at what people are buying. And economists try and predict that for a good reason. They're trying to figure out how many cell phones to make next year, how many cars to make next year, what's going to sell next year. I looked at the Federal Reserve's predictions of what would happen next year, and then I compared it with the result. What I found out is over a 30-year period, there were at the time, you literally could have done better flipping a coin.
Hmm.
I'm not claiming the Fed is incompetent. Quite the reverse. These are smart guys and gals, of course. doing smart stuff, but the job is impossible. Let me give your viewers a similar job to do and let them find out for themselves. Today, when we finish this discussion, get on your favorite weather app. Find out what the predictions are a week in advance,
Mm-hmm.
every day. Then wait and see next week, how did those predictions turn out? What your viewers find out is not very well. The last few days here in
Yeah.
Arizona, they've been off by 11 degrees. It
Hmm.
might not make a big difference sometimes, but right here, we're getting close to frost. An 11-degree difference decides whether I go to the work of spending an hour to bring in a bunch of outdoor plants into the house because it's going to freeze or not. And I don't want to have to keep moving my plants back and forth because the weather can't get there. And now we're not talking about a week in advance, we're talking about a day in advance. They say it's going to be 40 degrees and it's really 30. If you're dealing with plants, that makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And and why is this, and how is the weather like the economy? They're both chaotic systems. Lorenz in 72, building weather models, found out tiny changes in input levels could make huge differences in the outputs. Changing one variable in the weather model changed the result completely. His famous line, could a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil could precipitate a tornado in Texas? The answer is yes, because every single air and water molecule impacts the weather.
Mm-hmm.
A tiny change at the right time, you're thinking about a tipping point. There's something right on the verge, like a tornado in Texas, and all it
Mm-hmm.
one molecule to tip that one way or the other.
Hmm.
That's where the butterfly flapping is called the butterfly effect, which I'm sure your listeners have heard of. Could I make a similar economic analogy? Yes. Is it possible that a guy buying a pair of shoes in Peru precipitates a depression in Poland? Absolutely. Why is that? Because there are millions of people, billions of people in the world buying and selling stuff every day. And even worse, they're thinking about what they're going to buy and sell tomorrow. I can't read minds of 9 billion people and tell you what they're going to do tomorrow. And that's a lot of the reason why that's why socialism fails. Even your listeners that might think, well, socialism could be a good idea. Even if they like the idea, here's the kicker: it has to fail. Why? Because in a socialist government, what they're going to do is they're going to hire somebody like me, and they're going to get an economist and say, okay, Dr. Doug, tell us how many cell phones to make next year, how many cars to make next year, how many trucks, what should the balance be, what brands should we make, more than one brand, or should we make all Volkswagen Beetles like Hitler forced Germany to
Hmm.
do? I can't do that. I'm not even close to that smart. And the bottom line is nobody is. If you ask 15 economists what's going to happen next month, you'll get 20 different answers, because these are things that are unpredictable. In order to do what economists are asked to do with any reasonable accuracy, it's the equivalent of a weather forecaster having to know what every air and water molecule in the world was going to do tomorrow. I don't care how many what weather stations you build, that's never going to happen. And in fact, Lorenz was actually able to make a convincing mathematical proof that the best you get on weather projections was 2 weeks out. That's
Hmm.
probably about for the economy too. If you ask me to predict what's going to happen 2 weeks from now, I can give you a decent answer. But talking about next year, which is what I'd have to do if I were going to plan projections for how many cell phones to make, I'd have to know a year in advance. Hopeless. Absolutely. I could flip a coin and act like I was saying something smart, but it would be an educated guess. That's why you see economists on any prediction you look at varying by dramatic degrees. They're like weathermen. They're taking their best shot, but any of them that are honest will tell you that they're just taking their best shot.
There are chances where if I look at my weather app tonight and I look for a forecast for the next week, some of those days may be correct.
Hmm.
It may be off by a little bit. It
Hmm.
may turn out to rain all of a sudden, but
Hmm.
maybe I can get lucky. There's
Hmm.
3 days in which they say it's going to be sunny,
Hmm.
and you practice evidentiary economics, focusing on evidence. Evidence being the
Hmm.
best ways to predict or see what works and what doesn't work. So in that case, are there any evidence that socialism can work or has worked in the past? Because a lot of people have found interest in socialism, and we can see it in New York City with the election of Zohran Mamdani. People, whether they like him or they don't like him, are giving him the title or the aura of is a democratic socialist. So socialism has arrived in New York, one of the most consequential cities in the world, especially in the United States. When there's Wall Street, you got 9 million people living in the city. Is there any evidence that people could have some sort of faith or confidence that New York can still function? Can socialism work in that city?
He calls himself a democratic socialist. So let's start there. Socialism is an oxymoron. You can't have democracy and socialism, they're incompatible. If you don't have economic freedom, you don't have freedom. And so, a free economy, free markets, are the ultimate freedom. Every single day, every single one of us votes with our money. We literally put our money where our mouth is. And so, you see people complaining about, well, that we shouldn't be buying so much stuff from China, but they're buying stuff from China because they see it's cheaper. And so they're going to do what's in their best interest and buy stuff from China, even though they may be ideologically opposed to it. When people talk about democratic socialism, for example, Bernie Sanders, what he really envisions, what he actually talks about, is not socialism. He's talking about things like the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden,
Mm-hmm.
some of the others in Europe. Those countries are not socialist. The government does not own the means of production. That's one of the definitions of socialism. The government does not own all the property. That's another definition, another part of the definition of socialism. Those countries are capitalist countries. They are free market, entrepreneurial, capitalist countries. The only difference is they have a slightly larger safety net than the one here in the US.
Hmm.
That's the difference. Now, on the other hand, most of them are backing away from their social safety nets because they're finding out it's hard to maintain those with government funding, that capitalism works better. What's going to happen in New York? I think several things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is Mamdani is going to find out that he doesn't have the power he thinks he has.
Hmm.
That's often what happens with socialists. They think, I'm going to change this and this and this and this. And he's going to find out that there are federal laws, state laws, county laws, city laws, and a whole lot of other actors he's going to have to deal with to do almost all of what he wants to do. If he's able to do the things that he wants to do, he's going to find out that most of them don't work. For example, the idea of state run grocery stores, or in this case, city run grocery stores. Now, what would that mean? Well, his complaint is that the evil grocery store owners are making too much profit on the backs of consumers. Well, first of all, if he had done 10 minutes of research with AI, he'd find out that grocery stores are among the least profitable enterprises in the country. Typical profits run around 2-3%. They don't make much at all. What he's going to find out is that if he the city run grocery store, he's going to have to buy stuff from suppliers to put on the grocery store shelves. Now, New York is a large market, but he doesn't have nearly the buying power that Amazon, Walmart, Costco, Kroger do. So he's going to, even if he gives the stuff at wholesale, even if he marks it down and lets the city kick in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% to make the stuff cheaper, it's still going to be more expensive than
Hmm.
Costco, Walmart, and Kroger because he can't get the kind of buying discounts that they can get. And so Walmart is famous for putting tremendous pressure on the suppliers to get those costs down. And he can't do that. He doesn't have the leverage. In the best case, he's going to still have to charge 10% more than Costco, Walmart, or Kroger. So his city run grocery stores are going to be more expensive than the capitalist run stores because that's the difference between evidentiary economics and philosophical economics is that he doesn't look at the evidence. He looks at, I've got this great idea. Wouldn't it be good if groceries were cheaper? Well, the way you get groceries to be cheaper is do stuff to make them cheaper, create more supply or create less demand. You have to do things that actually change the price. And the things he's talking about don't do that. So they aren't going to work. So he's going to find out that the things he wants to do, either A, he won't be able to do them at all because other actors will prevent him from doing it, or they're not going to work out well. They're going to, and already a lot of people are leaving New York. In fact, they're leaving most of the
Hmm.
blue cities because, as Margaret Thatcher said, sooner or later you run out of other people's money because other people get sick of it. They go, I'm not going to stay here because, like, California's putting in this billionaire tax. What's happening? The billionaires are leaving. What's that going to do to California's economy? It's going to hurt it. And the same thing's going to happen in New York. Now, is New York going to come to some grinding halt as a result of this? No. New York will survive. It's going to hurt a lot of people, and it's going to ultimately probably hurt the economy of New York for a decade or two. New Yorkers will be worse off for at least 10 or 20 years.
Hmm.
The economy is not going to tank. It'll survive, but a lot of people will suffer because of it. And so the ultimate thing is to look at the evidence and say, what makes people better off? And what makes people better off is not trying to give them something for nothing. In fact, most ultra rich people we're talking about, and I certainly wouldn't call myself rich, but in my estate planning, I'm not planning on leaving a lot of money to my descendants. I've got it set up in a trust where I'm going to dribble it out over decades, enough to help a little bit. But why is that? Because I don't like my kids or my grandkids or my great grandkids? No. It's because I know that giving them a bunch of money is not going to help them. It's going to make things worse.
Hmm.
It makes people dependent on not creating value. I want to see my kids and my grandkids. I got to say, I'm proud. My kids have done great creating value. And my grandkids are doing great creating value. My great grandson just had a huge success selling bananas. He's 6 years old, selling bananas at a stand in his front yard.
Wow.
I mean, that's he saw and he thought people coming by would might need a little snack on the way to work, and thought I could sell them a banana, creating value for people at age 6. And he's doing that because people aren't just giving him money. And by the way, people like Gates and Bezos are not planning to make their kids because they understand the same thing I understand that you don't help people by doing that. You want to see your kids succeed by creating value for other people, by doing wonderful things for the world, not by sitting around collecting a paycheck from you. And that's exactly what we do, unfortunately, with our welfare programs. Now, am I anti welfare? No. You show me a program that literally will lift people out of poverty, and I'm there. Let's find a way to do that. But if what you're saying is we're going to give people a bunch of money, that allows them to stay in poverty, no, I'm not on board with that at all. And that's exactly what we've done, particularly to minorities. We've actually destroyed a whole lot of minority communities by what we've done with welfare systems, because we've given too much that doesn't help. And if you look at the poverty rates from the year the war on poverty started till today, the poverty rate has gone up and down. The low was 7% and the high was 12%. The 12% was when Clinton was president, the 7% was in the first Trump administration. But the bottom line is today it's 8%. It's exactly where it started.
Hmm.
What, since 1960? How can anybody claim the poverty program is successful if we haven't gotten anybody out of poverty? The idea is not to help people. The idea should be to get them out of poverty. If we're talking about a program that's going to be intensive job training and first helping people find their bliss and helping them find a way that they'd love to create value for others, and then help training them over a year or two, I can get behind that. And I don't mind spending taxpayer dollars, but just giving the same people the same amount of money year after year makes them even poorer, because now they're poor in spirit too.
Hmm.
I mean, I would ask your listeners, think about this. Would you want to spend your life knowing that you were a complete loser, couldn't do anything, and getting paid by the government not to? That would be hell. That wouldn't be a wonderful place I'd like to live. And I don't want to be a part of doing that to other people. That's not helping people. What would help people most is creating value for them. Find a way to pursue your bliss and at the same time create value for others. And if we were all doing that, isn't that the heaven John Lennon was shooting for? He had the wrong way of getting there, but isn't that the place where we would all be happiest? I would argue it is.
I think you just answered my final question, but I'll say it anyway in case there's anything you want to further emphasize, which is if the average citizen or the average person had to act on just one idea in which we have discussed that would most improve our society, what would it be and why?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think we just answered that question. I think that what I would encourage every individual to do is, and a lot of it doesn't take very long. For many, it might mean taking your hobby and escalating it into a business. For some people, it might mean looking for the best in the job you've got now. In other words, if you're working for a healthcare company in the scheduling department, you know, how can you do that in a way that brings the most value to the consumer? And I guarantee that if you do that, if you make the the bliss you seek for today at least,
Mhm.
not necessarily in the long run, finding the doing the best people you're talking to on the phone or whatever. Um, in fact, my wife had a doctor appointment yesterday. There was a customer service person at the desk helping an elderly couple deal with their bill. And I was really impressed by how wonderfully she did it. Completely respectful. She was friendly, joyful. And that couple left feeling really good about that
Mhm.
interaction. Okay. And I could tell that that young lady felt good about herself for doing it that way. I could just see that she was thinking, wow, I dealt with that really, really well. That's the first thing that'll happen if people follow their bliss, doing best they can do. They'll feel that pride. And that's something that most people in their work environment don't get to feel. And that's really
Hmm.
sad, because we feel good about ourselves when we do good stuff. That's how we're built. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is creating that value, asking yourself every day, how can I pursue my life in a way that creates more value for others? And that may mean changing jobs or starting a business or doing something different than what you're doing right now, but it may mean incorporating it into what you're doing now. Find something you love, get really good at it, and then find a way to create value for other people doing it. And I guarantee the people listening to us right now, if they do that, they will be happier, help themselves financially, and make the world a better place. It doesn't take that much. We can all do that every day.
Thank you, Dr. Doug. This was a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much. I've been writing a bunch of notes throughout our conversation. And one of the things to change the world is to create value. That's one way we can do so. Work to live, not live to work. Economics is full of choices. Something that you can change every day is your mindset, which can increase your happiness. If that customer service girl had a different mindset, she probably would have thought working here sucks and makes the consumer feel like, oh, if she doesn't think that her work is good, why am I going to be here and feel satisfied for what she does? You gave statistics on the growth of GDP when capitalism came a rise in the world in the year 1500. Talent can equal value. One way that socialism fails is that government uses the people's money, and because you said within 10 years of new businesses, about two-thirds of them fail, that's the price you pay with socialism, that it's the people's money, it's public money, it's taxes, and that's one thing I did not ask. And I think that would probably be for another conversation if you would like about the best route for taxes, because I think that's something that, especially with new Trump taxes coming into play, being renewed early this year, that's a big discussion moving forward with businesses, how it's going to affect small businesses and everybody else. Democratic socialism being an oxymoron. And I think the main thing that I really liked is when you answered that last question. Find your value or create value and find your bliss. I don't think there's another way better way I can say it. Finding your bliss. It's poetic and powerful. Where can we find you? Where can my audience find you? Read your book, find more information about you.
My book is available for pre-order on Amazon, also on Barnes and Noble, and I hope they'll go out and buy it. We just scratched the surface here today. If they read my book, they'll learn a lot more about the same kinds of things. I also have a website where a lot of these ideas are discussed, dougcardell.com, and I'd be happy for them to visit there too. If my book and the website can help them create value, that would be great. I would love to see them all prosper and do well with a little bit of help from me.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your mission. I appreciate what you're trying to do. It ties into what I like to do. Have a conversation, have more people learn about different parts of the world. In your case, it's economics, very applicable to today.
Thank you, Derek. I've enjoyed being here, and if you want me to come back and talk about taxes, I'd be happy to.
That'd be fantastic. I think that'd be a very interesting conversation for next time.